Chapter 1, where we meet Ginny and her hapless father.
This dizzying adventure began on a bright, pleasant morning, one of those days when I expected no tricks from fate whatsoever and was focused only on dodging a muddy puddle where neighborhood boys were gleefully splashing around. "Hey, Ginny the herbalist!" shouted the quickest of them, Tommy. "Is it true that if you choose silent root, your tongue will fall off?" "It won't fall off," I answered calmly, shifting my thin shopping satchel to my other hand. "It'll just stick to the roof of your mouth until the next full moon. Want to try? I happen to have a piece left." With a frightened squeal, the boy jumped back, and his friends burst out laughing. I smirked to myself. Silent root was nothing more than a mild calming herb, but the legends about it did half my job of keeping order on our street. Our street. The outskirts of the outskirts was the only honest name for our neighborhood. The capital of Islandria grew like mold on old bread, upward, outward, and managed to skip our little corner as if embarrassed to look at it. Here the houses huddled together like lost travelers in a winter storm, and the cobblestones looked more like pits generously filled with filth. From our hilltop, you could see the white towers of the Palace District rising gently into the sunset gold. Two different worlds, divided not by walls, but by money. My home, also known as the shop Peters and Daughter, greeted me with the creak of its signboard, where faded letters still hinted at healing herbs and remedies. It smelled of dust, dried mint, and hopelessness. I had known that scent since infancy. "Father, I'm home," I called as I stepped inside. The air in the shop was thick and sweet, old herbs gone stale. The shelves, once heavy with jars and bundles of healing plants, now yawned with empty spaces. Dust lay in a velvety layer over the remedies no one wanted anymore. Who in our neighborhood needed a memory tonic or an elixir of vitality? People wanted something for hangovers and for the constant back pain from back-breaking labor. Everything finally fell apart the day Mother left us. I was very little, but I still remember the smell of her perfume. She couldn't endure the poverty, the endless debts, the scent of cheap remedies. She ran off with a traveling knight who promised her a life of luxury. She left Father with me and with a shattered heart. Since then, he had been fading slowly, like a plant pulled up before its time. As always, I found Father in the back room by the fireplace. Olden Peters sat hunched over an empty mug, staring into the dying embers. He had once been tall and strutty, like an ancient oak. Now his shoulders drooped, and the hands that once knew every herb by touch trembled slightly. His gray beard was unkempt, and his eyes, usually so clear, were clouded with exhaustion and something else I didn't want to name. "I brought bread, cheese, and apples," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "And some dried cherries. You like those. I can make compote, if you don't use them all for cherry liquor again." He slowly turned his head toward me. "Ginny," he rasped, Things are really bad, sweetheart." "They're always bad, Father, but we're getting by. Tomorrow I'll go to the Easton Market. Prices are better there. Maybe I can trade—" He cut me off, refusing to meet my eyes. "I lost everything. The last copper coins you set aside for taxes, and not just them." I froze with an apple in my hand. A cold knot tightened in my chest. "Where?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "The Rusty Gnome," he waved vaguely toward the direction of the seediest tavern in our district. There were new faces, friendly enough, invited me to join a dice game. At first, I was winning. But then, he swallowed. "Now I owe them. I owe them a lot." He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw more than despair. I saw raw, mute fear. They said if I don't repay the debt. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. My imagination did it for him. I set the apple on the table. It rolled, fell to the floor, and landed with a dull thunk. The sound was as final as a verdict. I stared at his bent back, at the barren shelves, and at his trembling hands, and I felt my familiar, poor but stable life cracking open, revealing a dark, bottomless pit underneath. That's it, I thought. The end. I paced the room, my mind racing with desperate ideas. Steal? My hands would tremble too much. Become a servant for some wealthy merchant? No one would hire us. Father was a burden. Sell the shop? No one would take it even for free. And where would we go? I begged my brain to give me anything, a plan, a spark, a miracle. But all I felt was the crushing weight on my chest and the icy dread crawling up my throat. I stared at Father's bent back, at the barren shelves, and understood. We were trapped, and the door of that trap had already slammed shut.
Chapter 2, where Ginny searches for a way to survive.
Despair is a treacherous thing. At first, it paralyzes you like the venom of a wood viper, turning your thoughts into shredded scraps of fear. But by morning, when a cold sliver of light slips through the shutters, despair hardens, becomes something sharp, solid, and reckless. It was that cold blade inside me that drove me down to the cellar once Father's snoring finally settled into a deep, steady rumble. The air below was thick and unmoving, smelling of damp earth and decay, as if the ground beneath the city were slowly rotting away. I pushed aside the empty brine barrels and scraped clumps of dried mud from the floorboards under the unsettling sensation of being watched. The wood gave way with a quiet but resentful creak, as though it didn't want to release what it had guarded for so many years. The bundle wrapped in oil-soaked leather was cold and heavy. I carried it upstairs to my little room and unfolded it with trembling fingers. Root and crown, the golden, dulled letters on the black, starless night leather, still held traces of former grandeur. My grandmother had shown it to me only once, touching the cover with fingers like dried roots. Our clan's legacy child, the clan of the night bloom. Power that walks the edge of a knife. Remember, one wrong step and it'll cut you to death. I opened the book. Pages covered in faded ink and symbols that shimmered at the edge of vision whispered to me in the forgotten language of our ancestors. They were more than fever cures and freckle-removing balms here. There were formulas for poisons that paralyzed the mind, instructions for brewing potions that made hearts leap with passion or freeze with terror, curses that could spoil livestock and blight harvests. Magic in Alandria wasn't merely forbidden, it was burned out with hot iron. A charge of witchcraft led straight to the scaffold, where the executioner gladly showcased his skill for the crowd. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to drown out the voice of reason, screaming at me about madness. But another voice pushed through. Father's face, gray with fear, the empty shelves in our shop, the debt, vast and immovable as a slab of granite. A noose for witchcraft, or a knife in a filthy alley for unpaid debt, I thought bitterly. At least the noose has a certain style. I chose the style. My work began in utter secrecy. At night, by the trembling flame of a candle stub dancing like a little demon on the walls, I studied the recipes. Hands once used to handling delicate chamomile petals now shook over a mortar filled with toxic roots and dried frog legs. I started small. Small enough not to kill, but enough to make life unpleasant. a concoction that made the neighbor's cow curdle its milk right inside the udder, a mixture that caused a harmless but very noticeable rash on the face of an aging coquette. I sold them as powerful curses, and people paid. They paid eagerly. But the real bestseller were my so-called love potions. I wasn't foolish enough to dabble in real love magic. Those consequences were unpredictable and horrifying. Instead, I crafted complex aromatic blends that gave the drinker a swell of confidence and a gentle euphoric lift. An apprentice who became slightly bolder after drinking my brew suddenly charmed the master's daughter. A shy girl who used my Aphrodite's perfume, as I called it, caught the attention of the man she'd been pining after. A trick, a farce, but it worked. As though fate herself, tired of high tragedy, had decided to play cheap comedy with us. Every coin I earned, coppers, silver, I hid in a secret compartment under the floor. I didn't spend a single penny. We still ate stale bread and empty soups, still wore worn-out clothes. But that growing stash was my fragile bridge across the abyss. The illusion shattered in an instant when the shop door was kicked off its hinges. Instead of daylight, darkness rushed into the room in the shape of 3 men. It was them. The men from the Rusty Gnome. Their leader, a man whose scar-riddled face looked like a map of cruel roads and dead, fish-like eyes missed nothing, threw Father's empty coin pouch on the counter. Old Olden has his fun and we're the ones paying his debts. Where's our money, old man? His voice grated like rusty gates. Father, sitting on a stool, shrunk into himself, trying to become smaller. I'm gathering it, he whispered. You're gathering too slowly, the fish-eyed man muttered. One of his thugs, a giant with fists like anvils, stepped forward and, with no anger, no heat, just cold efficiency, punched Father in the stomach. Father folded in half with a groan and collapsed to the floor. Blood stained his lip. Something inside me boiled over. I rushed forward, shielding Father with my body. The money will be there, I shouted straight into the leader's dead eyes. Just give us time. He slowly licked his lips, studying me as if I were a cut of meat for sale. He leaned in so close I could smell cheap tobacco and something rotten. You've got a month, exactly. He tilted his head towards Father, wheezing on the floor. If all the money isn't there, we'll start with him. We'll break his bones one by one. And as for you, his smile was slow and vile. In the brothels of Swamp Bottom, tough little things like you don't live long, but they earn well while they last. They left, slamming the door, leaving behind the thick stench of threat. I didn't sleep that night. I wrapped Father's bruises, and he stayed silent. And in that silence lived more pain and shame than any scream could carry. When the first roosters began their morning song, I started packing his bundle. You're going to Aunt Mary's, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. To Elderhook. Today, on the morning cart. No, Ginny, I can't leave you. His voice was thin, a frayed thread. I'm not leaving you, I said, kneeling in front of him to meet his eyes. You're giving me room to move. While they're looking for us here, I'll gather the rest of the money and join you. 2 weeks, not more, I promise. I lied. I lied as sincerely as I possibly could, pouring all my daughterly love and quiet desperation into every word. I watched hope and fear battle inside his gaze. Hope won. Weak and broken, he clung to it like a drowning man to a straw. I walked him all the way to the cart, pushed him gently into the dirty cushions, and handed the driver a few coins. He looked at me from under the cart's canvas, small, defeated, and I waved until the cart disappeared into the morning fog. When I returned to the empty shop, I felt no relief, only the heavy weight of a new burden. The plan was simple and insane.
survive a month, take a few more expensive and dangerous commissions, gather the last coins, and vanish. Change my name, cross the border, start over. I stood in the middle of the quiet shop, listening to my heart pulse out the countdown to the end of my freedom. I thought it would be the debt collectors who ruined my escape. I had no idea fate had prepared another trap, one that would knock on my door the very next night in the form of a mysterious stranger, a pouch of gold, and an offer that would mark the beginning of the end.
Chapter 3, where Ginny receives a dangerous offer.
The silence after Father's departure was different, thicker, ringing, full of ghosts. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every rustle outside sounded like the heavy footsteps of debt collectors. I tried to busy myself with ordinary tasks, sorting herbs, washing jars, but my fingers refused to obey, and my thoughts tangled, always circling back to the same things. The hiding place beneath the floorboards where pitiful savings lay, and the enormous sum that stood between us and ruin. Night fell on the city, black and bottomless. I didn't light any candles. I sat in the dark of the back room, listening to the pounding of my own heart. And then, through that pounding, another sound cut through. Quiet, but unmistakable. A knock on the door. Not loud, not aggressive. Precise, like a nail being tapped into a coffin lid. A chill crawled down my spine. Debt collectors? No, they would have broken in without ceremony. The city guard? But why knock? Holding my breath, I crept toward the door. "Who's there?" My voice came out hoarse with tension. There was no answer. Instead, a shadow slowly crawled under the doorframe, blocking the dim glow of the street lantern. I slid the bolt back as if walking toward the scaffold. A figure stood on the threshold, tall, wrapped in a cloak of thick, dark, almost black fabric. The hood was so deep it swallowed all light, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness. Cold emanated from him, not the street's chill, but something grave cold, and he smelled faintly of old parchment and dried wormwood. "Ginny Peters," the voice said, low, even, without the slightest hint of emotion. He wasn't asking, he was stating. Instinctively, I stepped back, but he was already inside, and the door closed behind him with a soft, decisive click. He looked out of place here, like a blot of starless night dropped into our shabby little shop. "I've heard you provide specialized services," he continued. His unseen gaze slid over the shelves, as though he could see through the walls and into all my secrets. "I don't know what you're talking about," I managed, gripping the tiny vial of sleeping powder hidden in my dress pocket. "We're simple herbalists. The shop is closed." "Modesty is a sin when a life is at stake," he countered. From the folds of his cloak, a hand emerged, gloved in black. It held a small, tightly packed canvas pouch. He tossed it on the counter. A heavy, rich, metallic clatter filled the room, the sound I'd waited for my entire life, the sound of salvation. "There are 50 gold crowns inside. A deposit. You'll receive the second half once the job is done." 50. My heart froze, then began to pound so hard it hurt. That amount could cover the debt, pull Father back from the abyss I'd sent him into, and give us a chance to start a new life somewhere far, far away. A dream I'd been too afraid to even imagine lay on the counter just steps away. "What job?" I asked,
My voice betrayed me with a tremor. Silence stretched. Even the dust in the air seemed to stop and listen. "I need a poison," he said at last. The word hung heavy in the room, toxic and metallic as mercury. Colorless, tasteless, scentless, fast, leaving no trace. Everything inside me shrank into an icy knot. "No," I whispered. "No, I'm not. I'm not a killer. I can't." "Every herb in your shop is a poison in the right dose. You're not a killer. You're an instrument, like a knife in a cook's hand. I'm only asking you to forge the blade. What I do with it is my concern." "Leave," I said louder now, though my legs were trembling. I stared at the pouch. It seemed to pulse, radiating temptation. "Who is abhor?" I asked, grasping at one last desperate excuse. "Rats?" From under the hood, that impenetrable darkness stared back at me. "Rats," he repeated slowly, that icy smile returning. "Very large rats." He turned, and his dark cloak swept through the air like the wing of a night bird. "You have 3 days. I will return." And he disappeared into the night as silently as he had appeared, leaving me alone with ringing ears, a heavy pouch trembling in my hand, and the crushing knowledge that the point of no return had just slipped behind me.
Chapter 4, where Ginny makes a hard choice.
Morning came gray and cold. The sky stretched tight with a blanket of dirty wool. I lay on my bed, unable to move, trying to convince myself that the night visitor had been nothing more than a nightmare born of fear and exhaustion. But then my fingers brushed rough canvas under my pillow. The pouch. Heavy. Inarguably real. I poured the gold crowns out onto the blanket. They lay there, cold, accusing, flashing even in the dim light. The temptation was physical, almost painful. Take them, right now, run to the wagons, get out, find father, and start over. This money would be enough to disappear. Just grab it and... A sharp, insistent knock on the shop door cut through my thoughts like a knife. My heart dropped into my heels. Them? Already? I frantically gathered the coins, shoved them back into the pouch, and tucked it into my bodice. The chill of the gold burned against my skin. Moving quietly, I crept to the window and nudged the shutter open a fraction, and nearly burst into hysterical laughter from sheer relief. It wasn't the gang. It was Mrs. Brickwell, the neighborhood gossip whose passion for petty nastiness knew no limits. Her face, forever frozen in the expression of offended virtue, was twisted now with impatience. "No, not now," I whispered to myself, closing my eyes. But there was no way out. Refusing work would look suspicious. "Coming, Mrs. Brickwell," I called, forcing as much cheer into my voice as I could. I flung the door open and tried to block the entrance, but she slipped past me with the agility of a very determined cat. "Ginny, darling, I need something urgently." That upstart, Mrs. Hopkins, bought herself a new silk shawl. Everyone knows it's with her husband's money. He's out of town. We simply must make sure that shawl, I don't know, fades, or gets stained, or eaten by moths. You must have something for that, don't you? She looked at me with such excited anticipation, I almost threw up. While she plotted petty revenge over a shawl, I had a fortune hidden against my skin, bought at the price of a possible murder. Mrs. Brickwell, I'm not feeling very well, and I don't have the right ingredients. Nonsense, she waved that away. You always help everyone. I'm not leaving until you sell me something. That shawl must be destroyed by tonight. She settled onto a stool with the air of someone ready to wait all day. Guilt wouldn't move her. I needed to work, and to work, I needed her gone. I turned to the shelves, grabbed the first vial I could reach, and pushed it into her hands with still shaking fingers. Here, 3 drops on the shawl. The color won't fade, but it'll smell like rotten meat. Should last a week. Her face lit up with wicked delight. Wonderful! Perfect! How much do I owe you? Just take it, I whispered, staring longingly at the door. It's on the house. Just please go. She kept chattering, overflowing with gratitude, but I barely heard her. I practically shoved her out of the shop and slammed the door, pressing my back against it as if I could hold the whole world on the other side. But the world pushed in again, barely an hour later. This time, the knock was familiar, rough, heavy, confident. A flash of dark clothing slid past the crack. My breath caught. I knew who it was. I didn't want to open. I could pretend I wasn't there, but they wouldn't leave. They'd break the door down. Slowly, like a condemned prisoner, I slid the bolt back. 2 men from the gang stood on the threshold. Not the leader himself, but his pet weasels, big brutes with empty eyes. "Well then, girl," one of them rasped, baring crooked yellow teeth and something like a grin. "The month's almost up. Got the money ready?" I'm gathering it," I stammered. "We've heard that one." The second man shoved the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. His gaze drifted over the empty shelves. "Doesn't look like you're getting any richer." "Reminder, if the money isn't there in 2 weeks, we'll find your old man, wherever you've stashed him. And as for you..." His eyes raked over me in a way that made me physically sick. They didn't hit me. They didn't break anything. They just stood there, pressing down with silent threat, then turned and left, leaving the door wide open behind them. I stood pinned to the wall, my stomach in knots, knowing one thing for certain. Running was useless. They'd find us. They always found people. Slowly, like someone walking toward the noose, I went to the loose plank and pulled out root and crown. The book was cold, as if it had absorbed all the icy dread of the last few days. I flipped through the pages, and they whispered like dry leaves over a grave. The recipe for Night Bloom's drop lay in front of me. Colorless, tasteless, scentless. Death, poured into a few drops of liquid. I got to work. My hands were shaking. I dropped vials, spilled infusions. The first attempt failed. The mixture turned cloudy and gave off a sharp, unpleasant smell. I poured it out, feeling a strange rush of relief. But I couldn't give up. I went down to the cellar, and with a piece of lard and an old mousetrap, caught 2 fat rats. They sat in the cage, their bead-like eyes glittering. I was almost grateful for them. Having something tangible made the horror feel containable, distracting me from thoughts of who the poison was truly meant for. On the 3rd try, the potion turned out right. It was crystal clear, like morning dew. I poured it into a small glass vial and sealed it with a black wax stopper.
My hand didn't even tremble as I added a single drop to water and slid it toward one of the rats. It took a few sips, paced across the cage, and went still. Then its body jerked once in a final spasm, and it lay quiet, fast, no visible suffering. I stared at it as a lump rose to my throat. It was all so simple. And then, as if summoned by death herself, I heard a soft sound in the shop. I flinched and spun around. He was already there, standing in his dark cloak as if he had never left at all. His arrival was unnaturally silent. "Is it ready?" His voice was calm and lifeless as ever. I tightened my grip around the vial. It was warm from my hand. "Yes," I whispered. "But you're really going to use it on rats, right? Big rats?" He extended a gloved hand, palm open. "Rats," he confirmed. Not a single note shifted in his voice. "Very big, very dangerous rats. They're destroying the kingdom. I'm doing a good deed." It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. But I wanted so desperately to believe it. I wanted to believe I wasn't becoming an accomplice to murder, that I was just helping rid the city of vermin. Slowly, as if handing over a piece of my soul, I set the vial into his open palm. The gloved fingers closed around it. The second pouch of gold, just as heavy, dropped into my hand. Cold, emotionless metal. "Our business is concluded. Forget you ever saw me." He turned and slipped into the dusk like a ghost. I remained alone. Gold in one hand, the price of our salvation, and in the other, the memory of a small, lifeless rat and the clear liquid that had killed it. And I knew that from now on, it wouldn't be the debt collectors with knives that haunted my dreams, but that tiny, still body and the tear-clear vial.
Chapter 5, where Ginny's problems only grow worse.
That night, nightmares didn't come as hazy visions. They arrived like rightful masters of my mind. Again and again, I saw the tiny vial and the black-gloved hand. Saw it swell into a massive, poisonous drop, falling into a goblet of wine. And from the darkness, a young, pale face crowned with golden curls stared back at me. Then I saw the rat that turned toward me just before it died, its eyes suddenly human. My father's eyes. I jolted awake, heart pounding like a trapped bird. Only the cold, solid weight of the pouch beneath my pillow reminded me this wasn't a dream. I fell asleep only at dawn, when the first unsuspecting sparrows began chirping outside. I woke to sunlight stabbing straight into my eyes, already high in the sky, nearly noon. My head felt heavy, stuffed with lead, and my limbs ached. Today, I told myself, forcing my body upright, today I end this. I hid most of the gold back in the secret space under the floor, keeping only enough to pay the debt, with the little extras so those greedy hounds wouldn't ask questions. The coins clinked at my belt like shackles. Each one had been bought with a night of terror. But now, they meant freedom, salvation. I was going to find those bastards at the Rusty Gnome, throw the money in their faces, and wipe this nightmare from my life forever. After that, I would run to my father and we would start over, together. I was ready to forget magic, potions, everything, just to reclaim even a shred of peace. I reached for the door to lock the shop behind me, when suddenly, a deafening crash exploded from outside. Not a knock, a crash. As if a log had been slammed into the door. Wood cracked, splinters flew inward, and in the next instant, the door burst open, tearing loose from one hinge. They filled the doorway, blotting out the light. Palace guards. Not the city's thugs, not common enforcers, but the elite. Cloaks of blue trimmed with silver, breastplates polished to a mirror shine, faces carved from stone, eyes looking through me as if I were already nothing. I froze, unable to move, coins slick in my sweating palm. What do you want?" I whispered. They didn't answer. Two stepped forward, their gauntleted hands closed around my arms with such force my bones creaked. The coins spilled from my grip, scattering across the floor with the ringing despair. "No, wait! What did I do?" My screams, my attempts to wrench free, none of it mattered. They dragged me like a sack of flour through the dusty street. People scattered, people stared. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Brickwell peeking out from behind her curtain, her face alight with hungry curiosity, not concern. The world I knew slipped away at the relentless pace of the guards' boots. They hauled me into the stone bulk of the royal prison. Inside, it reeked of damp, urine, and fear. The groan of heavy doors, the clang of bolts, it all merged into the deafening symphony of my doom. They shoved me into a cell so small I could touch both walls by stretching out my arms. The only light seeped through a narrow slit near the ceiling, a thin, dusty ribbon of day. The door slammed shut, and I was alone, swallowed by tomb-like silence. Time lost all meaning. I sat curled up on the cold stone floor, arms wrapped around my legs, and could think of only one thing. They know. They found out about the poison. The door opened again. A man stepped inside, not armored, but dressed in a dark blue, impeccably tailored doublet. His face was thin, ascetic, the lips tight, the cold, pale gray eyes sharp enough to cut. In his hands, he carried a small object wrapped in velvet. "Ginny Peters," he said. His voice was quiet, but every word pierced like a steel quill. "This vessel was found in the chambers of His Royal Highness, Prince Edwin. Traces of a potion were inside, the same potion that sent the heir to the throne into the arms of his ancestors." I couldn't breathe. The world shrunk to that vial in his hand. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Oh, it's quite possible," he cut in. "The seal from your shop, a recipe we have confirmed belongs to forbidden alchemical practices. Do you have anything to say, girl? Who is your accomplice? What conspiracy are you part of? Who ordered you to kill the prince?" His questions lashed me like a whip. "No one. I didn't kill the prince. I made it, but they told me it was for rats, for big rats." Lord Vidar let out a cold, humorless laugh. The sound was like ice cracking. "For rats. Charming. Apparently, Prince Edwin was one of those rats. Do you truly expect anyone to believe such nonsense?" "It's the truth," I screamed, hysteria sharpening my voice. "A man in a cloak came to me. He paid. I didn't know." "A man in a cloak," he repeated, dripping poisonous irony. "The convenient client. I have no time for fairy tales, girl." He stepped back toward the door. "You have until morning. Think. Remember names, details, motives. If by dawn you have not come to your senses and given me the truth, all of it, you will greet the rack at sunrise. And after you confess, you will be taken to the main square where the executioner will show the kingdom what happens to those who raise a hand against royal blood." He left. The bolt slammed shut with a final, merciless clang. I was alone in suffocating darkness. The word rack echoed through my bones like freezing wind. The word execution sat in my throat like a stone.
I curled into the corner trying to make myself small, invisible, but the walls pressed in, unyielding. I was trapped, and this time no amount of gold could save me. Only the truth could. The truth I could not speak, because no one would ever believe in a man in a cloak. And I myself, I was no longer sure he had ever truly existed.
Chapter 6, where Ginny awaits an unexpected encounter.
The darkness in the cell wasn't just the absence of light. It was something alive, thick, viscous, swallowing every sound, every hope. I sat with my back pressed against the cold wall, trying to breathe steadily, but each breath echoed with the promise of torture. The word rack swung before my mind like a pendulum, counting down the last hours of my life. And then the darkness sneezed. I jolted upright, eyes flying open. In the middle of the cell, where a second ago there had been nothing, a strange glow gathered. Not bright, more like a pale moonlit shimmer. The shape was blurry at first, but slowly it formed into the outline of a young man. Tall, regal, dressed in what looked like expensive but translucent clothing. His hair was pale gold, almost transparent. It was the same young man I'd seen in my nightmares. Prince Edwin. I gasped and scrambled into the corner, crossing myself in sheer panic. Hallucination, I thought desperately, but he didn't disappear. If anything, he looked mildly annoyed as he inspected his ghostly hands, tried to adjust an invisible cravat, and then, slipping for absolutely no reason, stepped sideways straight into the wall. Half of his body sunk through the stone. He recoiled with a startled yelp, staring in horror at his lower half still sticking out of the wall. "Good grief!" His voice came strangely muffled, as if coming from the next room. "Not again. This is devilishly inconvenient." He concentrated, and his body, wearing a very put-upon expression, floated out of the wall entirely. You've come for me? For revenge?" I whispered. He raised his eyebrows in such offended disbelief, as if I'd asked him to polish my boots. "Revenge? My dear girl, if I wanted revenge, I'd haunt your window at night and moan piteously, or make every wine bottle you touch turn into vinegar. Revenge is an art form. No, I've come for help." "Help?" I echoed, stunned. "You were killed by my poison." "Well aware, thank you, which is precisely why you owe me. I was poisoned like some rat-catcher's apprentice. Outrageous. My murderer must face justice." "But the investigator, he said I acted alone. In some conspiracy?" I stammered. "Lord Vidar." Edwin's head bobbed sharply, so sharply his neck stretched like a piece of pulled taffy. "He's looking for a scapegoat, a convenient culprit, but the real murderer is still out there, and I know who it is." He paused, and something in his spectral features twisted with genuine pain. "My uncle, Lord Callan." "See? Then surely the investigator suspects him too." "I doubt it," Edwin said dryly. "My uncle hides his ambition masterfully. Everyone sees only a grieving brother, a devoted uncle. But I saw his eyes when father discussed my future rule. There was hatred there. And now he wants the throne. And my sister, Annalise, she's the only rightful heir left. If anything happens to her, the path to the crown opens for him. I won't allow it." "But I'm in prison," I practically wailed. "They're executing me tomorrow." "Details," Edwin said dismissively with a flick of his hand. "We'll sort that out. We simply need to get out." He drifted toward the door and stared at the keyhole with the solemn intensity of a general studying a fortress map. "Here's the plan. I need to possess one of those wooden-headed oafs outside. Theoretically, I simply slip in. Practically, it feels like trying to jam yourself into an icy, narrow boot barefoot while seasick." His spectral form scrunched into a glowing knot of determination and launched itself at the door, near the keyhole. There was a dull thud, and he bounced off, rubbing his forehead in indignation. "Blasted thing! I keep forgetting about all this material nonsense." "Maybe you shouldn't?" I squeaked. "I must," he barked. "I just need momentum." This time he floated all the way back to the opposite wall, positioned himself like a swimmer ready to dive, and shot forward. His shape elongated into a streak of pale light and vanished into the keyhole. Outside, there wasn't just a shout, but an entire symphony of confusion. "What? Whose? Huh?" Followed by what sounded like a man wrestling himself, grunting, shuffling, and then a heavy thud against the wall. Silence, broken only by labored, uneven breathing. After several long minutes, the cell door jerked, scraped horribly against the stone floor, and then burst open as if spit out. A guard stood in the doorway. Or rather, he stood wrong. Too straight, like a puppet pulled upright by tangled strings. His face glistened with sweat. One eye twitched wildly, while the other stared at the ceiling. He stepped forward, and instantly his legs went in separate directions, skidding like he was walking on ice. "Everything," he croaked in a strange double voice, the deep rumble of the guard mixed with the strained but unmistakable voice of Edwin. "Everything is fine. Just don't look at how I move. This is far more difficult than you think. It's so cramped in here and wet, and he's thinking about sweet rolls while I'm trying to operate his legs." I darted out of the cell, doing my best not to look at the guard's spasming foot. I was free. Freed by the inhuman efforts of a spoiled, clumsy, utterly impossible ghost prince. The cursed irony of it all. I dashed down the corridor, the staggering guard stumbling behind me, while Edwin muttered from within his body, "Left. No, right. Oh, pardon me, doorframe. Blast it. How do these boot things even work? I think I remember where the exit is, unless that's the stables. Either way, it smells intriguing."
Chapter 7, where the prince helps Ginny find a new job.
Escaping from prison turned out to be surprisingly easy compared to finding a safe corner in a sleeping city. The ghost and I were hiding in an abandoned carriage shed on the edge of the marketplace, a place that smelled of old wood and rat droppings. I sat wrapped in a greasy horse blanket I'd found, while Edwin paced nervously near the rafters, drifting straight through them every so often and reappearing with an offended look. "All right, a plan," he declared at last, stopping in front of me. His silhouette flickered like a candle in a draft. "You're wanted as a fugitive poisoner. Going home would be a spectacularly stupid way to die." "Thank you, Captain Obvious," I muttered, imagining with great pleasure how I'd throw a potato at him. Unfortunately, the only potato within reach was inside my stomach, and even that one was half raw. Therefore, he continued, ignoring me completely, we shall use a classic tactic, hiding in plain sight. You will return to the palace. I choked on my own breath. You've lost your mind. They know my face there. The investigator and a few guards, yes. But the palace isn't 2 rooms and a hallway. It's a city within a city. The kitchens, the laundries, the stables, they have their own bustling worlds. You'll get a job there. Claim your aunt works in the laundry and you came to help her. Any job will do. And then, he paused for dramatic effect, and his outline wavered. Then, you'll sneak into my uncle's chambers and find the evidence. The plan was so insane that it almost made sense. Who would search for a fugitive right in the beast's own lair? And so I found myself once again at the palace's service entrance, where the air smelled simultaneously of trash water and freshly baked rolls. Inside, chaos ruled. Pots clanged, cooks shouted, knives shrieked against whetstones. My Trojan horse was the story of a poor country girl visiting her aunt and begging for work. The head cook, Uncle Boris, was built like a bear and had a face permanently flushed from oven heat. He was roaring at some apprentice who dropped a sack of flour. I took the chance and approached. Sir, I'm looking for work. I'm strong. Out of my way, splinter, he bellowed without even glancing at me. Can't you see I'm busy? At that moment, a translucent head floated out of the wall right next to his ear. Appeal to pity, he hissed in my ear, sending goosebumps racing down my spine. Say you've got 5 little brothers, or that your cow was eaten by a dragon. I ignored him and hurried after the cook. I can scrub and wash until it shines. Uncle Boris turned, his eyes sliding over my grimy appearance. You should wash yourself first, girl. Tell him your father was a war hero. Edwin insisted, now drifting between us. Uncle Boris rubbed his eyes as if swatting away a fly. My father, I stammered. He saved a duke from a wild boar. Edwin whispered intensely, waving a few ghostly fingers like a sword. From a wild boar, I repeated helplessly. Silence fell across the kitchen. Even the cat by the stove stopped licking its paw. Duke Umberto, Uncle Boris said slowly. The one who died of gout 15 years before I was born? I froze. Edwin hung in the air, mouth open, faint steam of embarrassment rising from him. Thought so, the cook snorted. But instead of anger, a flicker of tired amusement crossed his face. Fine, what the hell? You look half-starved anyway. You're my new pot washer, until sunset. And if you break a single pot, you're out. Understood? Understood, I cried, barely resisting the urge to kiss his greasy apron. And remember this, he jabbed me in the chest with a pot holder. No silly stories in my kitchen, only work. And if I catch you talking to yourself, you'll fly out faster than a cork from sparkling wine. I nodded vigorously, afraid to breathe. Edwin, sulking, drifted straight through a barrel of pickles. I was trying to help, he grumbled, emerging from the other side. He's a brute, and he has absolutely no appreciation for the history of the kingdom. Thus began my life as a palace scullery maid. Dirt became my second skin. The smell of onions and grease, my new perfume. Edwin, unsurprisingly, was absolutely horrified. You smell like onion soup and despair, he informed me one afternoon, drifting through the pantry wall where I'd paused to catch my breath. And why am I, heir to the throne, forced to haunt a room decorated entirely with hanging pork legs? This is degrading. And forcing yourself into the mind of a guard who thinks about sweet rolls wasn't? I snapped, scraping potato peel off my hand. Just be quiet or go scout your uncle's quarters. This is my home, silly girl. I know everything here, he said proudly, raising a finger that immediately detached from his hand. With a scowl, he shoved it back in place. Blast it. Fine, I'll be back. He vanished and I sighed and hauled the bucket of scraps toward the back door.
The plan had begun. The first attempt. It happened that very evening. Using the excuse of getting lost while delivering dinner for the servants, which I conveniently ate behind a barrel to avoid questions, I slipped into the right hallway. Edwin floated beside me, whispering directions. Left. No, the door with the wolf's head. Wait, stop. That's a closet. Oops. Then a maid rounded the corner with a towering stack of laundry. I tried to look innocent by plastering myself against the wall. Edwin, thinking he was being helpful, concentrated and blew out a nearby candle. He passed through it, of course, but the icy gust that followed made the maid shiver violently. She crossed herself, shot me a terrified look, and fled, dropping handkerchiefs like breadcrumbs. Perfect, I thought bitterly. Now the palace staff will spread rumors about a ghost in the servant corridor. The second attempt. It was even more ridiculous. I snuck into Lord Kaelin's study while he was at a council meeting. Moonlight filled the room. Edwin darted nervously between shelves. Look for journals, correspondence, cipher keys. Cipher keys. Apparently princes read too many spy novels. I tore through his desk, but found no secret plans, but a stack of sentimental poems apparently written for someone, complete with sad little rose sketches and an invoice for a new horse harness. Then the door creaked. I dove under the table, heart in my throat. Lord Kaelin entered, followed by a maid with a dust rag. While he searched for some document on his desk and she dusted the shelves, I spent the 10 most longest moments of my life staring at their shoes. Edwin attempted to distract them, blowing out one candle, then another. Lord Kaelin flinched and crossed himself nervously. There's a draft, my lord, the maid offered. Or it's Edwin, saying goodbye, Lord Kaelin muttered darkly. He left without finding what he wanted. The maid followed. I crawled out from under the table, covered in dust. Cipher keys! Do they recruit idiots as princes too? I hissed at the ghost, who was currently melting into a guilty puddle on the ceiling. It's camouflage, he insisted desperately, a masterful disguise. He pretends to be sentimental and superstitious. We must dig deeper. Deeper. Yes, tomorrow night I was supposed to sneak into his bedroom. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine, and it wasn't just fear of getting caught. With every step, every failed attempt, every witness moment of Kaelin's timid superstition, I grew more certain. We were hunting the wrong beast, and the only person who couldn't see it was my persistent, bumbling, absolutely convinced he's right ghost prince.
Chapter 8, where Ginny runs into some old friends.
After 3 days as a scullery maid, the skin on my hands had turned red and cracked from water and lye, but at least I'd begun to find my way through the endless service corridors. Uncle Boris, seeing that I didn't shy away from work and hadn't broken too many pots, no more than the acceptable minimum anyway, started giving me tasks other than washing dishes. Girl, he barked one morning, shoving an empty basket and a handful of coppers into my hands. Get to the market, get something decent for the table, and make sure the fruit is ripe this time, not like those green plums that twisted her Grace's guts into a knot. And don't dawdle. My heart skipped a beat, leaving the palace grounds, a gift from fate and a massive risk. But refusing would have looked suspicious. Of course, right away, I chirped, doing my best not to look at Edwin, who, the moment he heard the word market, popped straight up out of a cauldron of boiling stew without leaving so much as a single bubble on the surface. Finally, he sighed, drifting along beside me down the corridor. Civilization, fresh air, and not that eternal smell of boiled cabbage. You can't even smell it, I muttered, adjusting the kerchief on my head. I sense it, atmospherically, he countered. The marketplace was its usual chaos. Shouting vendors, lowing cattle, the smell of spices, fish, and sweat. I forced myself to focus on the task, picking through apples and pears. Edwin, like a child at a fair, was distracted by absolutely everything. "Oh, look! A juggler!" He shot off toward the square, and I reflexively jerked after him, nearly knocking over a display of cheese. "Edwin! And what's this exotic bird?" He reappeared, sticking his head into a cage with a brightly colored pheasant. The poor thing exploded into flapping panic, hurling itself against the bars. "Get out of there! You're scaring it!" "Me? I'm being friendly." Muttering curses under my breath, I hurried away from the flustered bird seller. And that was when, circling around a hay cart, I saw them. 3 of them. Those 3, with their leader, whose face looked like a battered road map. They were standing by the butcher stall, talking animatedly. My blood turned to ice. I jumped back behind the corner of a building and pressed myself flat against the rough wall. What happened? Edwin appeared in front of me, just when I was about to lose my shit. Just when we really didn't need a friendly ghost. "You just went paler than my ceremonial dress uniform." "Debt collectors," I managed, struggling to catch my breath. "They're here." Genuine interest lit up Edwin's face. "Aha! The gentleman thanks to whom you murdered me? Let's have a look." Before I could stop him, he poked his head through the wall. At that exact moment, one of the thugs, the smaller one, scratched his head and glanced around. Weird. Felt like someone was staring at us out of the wall. "Idiot. That's the ale from last night talking." Edwin floated back to me with a self-important expression. "Well, well. Operation Escape? We need a diversion. I'll create one." "No," I hissed, almost yelling in a whisper. "Stay put." Too late. Edwin sailed over the street, hovering over a pottery stall. He focused and blew on the neat pyramid of clay pots. Nothing happened. "Damn," he muttered. "Need something heavier." He darted to the next stall, where horseshoes and nails were laid out in tidy rows. Another dramatic ghostly puff. Nothing again. Growing desperate, he began zipping back and forth between stalls, trying and failing to blow over bundles of onions and a caged chicken. From the outside, it probably felt like a series of random annoying drafts. Vendors frowned, adjusting their wares and muttering. Meanwhile, the debt collectors finished their conversation with the butcher and thank all the gods started walking away in the opposite direction from me. I held my breath in the shadows, ready to bolt into the nearest alley if they so much as turned their heads. And then, Edwin, apparently driven to madness by his lack of physical impact, made the single worst decision possible. He flew straight into a nearby donkey. The animal jerked, its eyes bulging with terror. With a piercing, not at all donkey-like scream, it bolted, dragging the cart behind it and plowing through everything in its path. The marketplace erupted into chaos. "There, see?" Edwin came spinning back to me, proud as a peacock. I executed a flawless diversion, just on a slightly larger scale than originally planned. I sighed silently, adjusted the basket of fruit which had, by some miracle, survived, and trudged back toward the palace. On the one hand, those bastards had been so close. On the other, at least now I knew one thing for certain. A donkey scream is a very effective, if wildly impractical method of cover.
Thank you, Your Highness, truly from the bottom of my heart.
Chapter 9, where Ginny must warn the princess of danger.
After the donkey disaster at the market, Edwin sank into a brooding, melodramatic gloom. My perfectly reasonable arguments that his uncle wasn't a murderer, but rather a miserable, lovesick poet, were dismissed with the sort of aristocratic contempt only a dead prince could muster. "You're as naive as that donkey," he declared, floating straight through my straw pallet in the palace kitchen. "He's masking his intentions, and the fact that we haven't found evidence against him only proves he's plotting something dreadful against my sister. I can feel it in my, ghostly bones." "You don't have bones," I sighed, rolling onto my other side. "And you don't have proof." "I have duty," he countered grandly. "Your duty, to be exact. Thanks to you, my bones are currently rotting in the family crypt. So listen, and don't interrupt, poisoner. Tonight, we're going to Annalise's chambers. You are going to warn her. Tell her you overheard conspirators. Tell her her life is in danger from Lord Kalin." The plan was as insane as everything else Edwin suggested. But arguing with the ghost whose only remaining possession was obsession was pointless. That night, creeping through dark, empty corridors, we reached her chambers. Edwin, having learned from past fiascos, didn't try blowing on torches or frightening servants. He simply slipped his head through the door to check the room. And froze. His translucent face contorted with such a mixture of shock, revulsion, and genuine horror that for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What is it?" I whispered. He drifted back, gesturing for me to look. I eased the door open a sliver. Princess Annalise's bedroom glowed softly in the light of the fireplace, and within that soft glow, on the enormous canopied bed, something was happening that absolutely did not align with Edwin's cherished notions of his younger sister's innocence. The princess, her golden hair spilled across the pillows, was not simply making love with her personal bodyguard, Captain Ryan. She was commanding the battlefield. Her posture, her confident expression, the unmistakable hint of a victorious smirk, everything screamed not of a maiden being defiled, but of a woman entirely in control of the situation. I jerked back and shut the door. Edwin was darting around the hallway like a wounded phantom. That upstart, that scoundrel, he seduced her, corrupted her. I'll kill him. I'll find a way. "Edwin, calm down," I whispered urgently. She didn't look corrupted. She looked pleased. "She's a child. She doesn't understand. She's been misled. We must save her." Saving her at that exact moment was, mildly speaking, wildly inappropriate. I hissed into the empty air in front of me. "Edwin, we need to leave, now." But he didn't hear me, still circling and muttering about dishonor and shame. Desperation gave me courage. I pretended to grab him by the sleeve, closing my fist around absolutely nothing, and yanked sharply down the corridor. "Move," I hissed with such ferocity that he actually froze for a beat. "Don't stop this farce unless you want me to get arrested. Your revenge won't matter one bit if I'm arrested. Or do you already have another assistant lined up?" My tone, equal parts terror and fury, worked better than physical force.
With an indignant huff, he finally floated after me, his translucent form quivering with outrage. You don't understand. He violated. I understand perfectly, I snapped, slipping into a safer hallway. But this is not the time or place. We had nearly reached the junction leading back to the service wing when something caught my eye. A tall, velvet armchair near the wall, and draped over its back, carelessly, almost arrogantly, was a cloak. Dark, expensive, fine wool. On the lining near the collar shimmered an embroidered pattern, small, subtle, almost invisible. Something familiar, something I had seen before. Somewhere not in the palace, not in books, somewhere tied to me. A cold needle pricked beneath my heart. I stopped dead, trying to drag the memory into focus. What are you daydreaming about now? Edwin muttered irritably. Come on, I need to lie down. Well, disperse and think about revenge. That cloak, I whispered, unable to tear my gaze away. What cloak? Edwin glanced. Ryan's? So what? The man has a talented tailor. Let's go. He tugged at me again, and this time I let him pull me into the dim corridor. But the feeling didn't fade. It deepened, sharp, precise, dangerous. That pattern. I had seen it. Not here. Not in any nobleman's quarters. Somewhere else. Somewhere tied directly to the nightmare I was trapped in. And the worst part wasn't that I recognized it. It was that I couldn't remember from where. But instinct whispered, cold, sharp as a knife, that this harmless scrap of fabric was a thread leading straight into the heart of the horror. And until I remembered where I'd seen it, Edwin and I were blind kittens batting at a string that could, at any moment, turn into a noose.
Chapter 10, where Ginny and the prince learn the truth.
2 days passed. 2 days in which I managed to wash a mountain of dishes, endure a dozen scoldings from Uncle Boris, and steal covert glances at Captain Ryan. His cloak, with that mysterious embroidery, would not leave my mind. Edwin, meanwhile, was in a strange state. After the scene in his sister's chambers, he grew quiet, almost thoughtful. His snide remarks dwindled to barely a whisper. He reminded me of a kettle just about to boil, the pressure mounting, the lid barely holding. Finally, on the evening of the second day, he materialized in front of me in the pantry where I was counting flour sacks. His face was solemn. "All right," he said without any preamble. "Let's assume you're right. Let's assume I was not entirely objective." I almost dropped the sack I was holding. "Sorry, did I hear that correctly? You're admitting you were wrong?" "Don't twist my words," he snapped, though without his usual spark. "I said assume. But to put all doubts to rest, we need undeniable proof. We have to go back to my uncle's chambers, and this time we stay until we learn the whole truth, whatever it is." There was a resolve in his voice, sharp, desperate, trembling. He was afraid. That much I understood, afraid of what he might find, but he could no longer live not knowing. So, deep into the night, we crept once more through the sleeping palace like thieves. This time, luck was on our side. The window to Lord Kaelin's study stood ajar, likely to air out the room, thick with smoke and the scents of old books. We slipped inside. The chamber was bathed in dim half-light. illuminated only by the silver wash of the moon. And in that pale glow, we froze. Lord Kalen sat in an armchair near the cold fireplace, hunched over a small portrait in a gilded frame. And the flicker of a lone candle, his face looked carved from grief itself, motionless, tormented, utterly broken. He was smiling here, Kalen said softly, brushing a finger across the glass. Just a month ago. Do you remember, Lilia? He laughed at that jester's ridiculous joke, the sound of his laughter. The door opened silently and the queen entered. Dressed in deep mourning black, she looked like a shadow, pale, fragile, almost translucent. I can't sleep, Kalen. Her voice trembled. He is everywhere in this palace, in every corner of this palace. She walked toward him and suddenly sank to her knees, burying her face in his lap. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Forgive me for being weak, for letting my father marry me off to your brother. Kalen gently set the portrait on the table and placed a hand on her head. You have nothing to ask forgiveness for, Lilia. It would be I who should have been stronger. I should have stopped that marriage. He tormented him, Kalen, the queen cried, lifting her tear-streaked face. Every day he reminded him he wasn't worthy of the crown, and I couldn't tell my son the truth. I couldn't admit that his real father was you. Edwin, invisible to them, staggered backwards. His ghostly form trembled. All these years, the queen continued clutching Kalen's hand. I watched you forced to stand aside, to watch your own son call you uncle, to watch him adopt the habits of that tyrant. But he had your eyes, Lilia, and your mind. He would have been a great king. Our king. Our boy. She rose and cupped his face in her hands. We lost him twice, Kalen. First, when we had to hide the truth, and now forever. I swore to protect him. Kalen's voice cracked. Swore that one day I would tell him he was my son. And now he couldn't finish. The sob that escaped him was raw, broken, utterly human. The queen pressed herself to him, their grief folding together, two halves of the same shattered heart. Edwin stared at them, and his form began to flicker, unsteady, like a candle caught in a draft. No! The whisper tore from him, full of such pain it felt like a hand squeezing my lungs. It was all a lie. His shape thinned, blurred, my whole life. And then he didn't float away. He didn't melt or fade. He shattered into 1,000 shards of silence. Gone. Only a cold, aching emptiness remained where he had stood. I stood frozen, unable to breathe. The truth we had searched for turned out to be more terrifying than any lie. It hadn't just robbed Edwin of vengeance. It had robbed him of his past, his name, everything he believed himself to be. A noise at the door snapped me out of my trance. Footsteps. I darted toward the window, but too late. The door burst open and a guard stepped in, the tall one, with the scar on his cheek. The one who led my first interrogation. His eyes widened in recognition. You! He barked. Stop! I didn't think. I jumped. My fingers barely caught the stone ledge. Below, 10 feet down, thorny bushes glinted in the moonlight. Behind me, shouts erupted. The room was filling with guards. The chase was on. I slipped. Branches tore at my arms and face as I crashed into the brushes. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything. I just ran, stumbling through dark garden paths, lungs burning, heart numb.
running from the guards, running from the truth, running from the terrible, echoing silence in my mind where a prince's arrogant, annoying, vibrant voice had once lived.
Chapter 11, where Ginny decides to act.
3 days passed. 3 days hiding in abandoned forest's huts at the edge of the royal park, too afraid to risk even lighting a fire. 3 days of deafening silence inside my own skull. I was angry at Edwin, angry that he'd run, angry at his weakness, angry that he'd left me alone to face his monstrous truth. But more than anything, I was angry at the situation. The real killer was somewhere in that palace, likely preparing their next move, and the prince and I had turned into a pair of fools, him sulking like an offended child, and me playing nursemaid. On the 4th day, my patience finally broke. The truth of Edwin's parentage was tragic, yes, but it didn't change the real point. He'd been murdered, and I knew who had done it. I walked out into a clearing, sat on a stump, and spoke into the empty air. Enough, Edwin. I know you're here. You can hear me. Silence. Your parents loved you. They still do. They mourn you in a way no one will ever mourn me. You were everything to them. Yes, they lied, but their lie was born of love and fear. But your sister's lie, or her lover's lie, that one came from hunger for power. They killed you, not your parents. The air in front of me shimmered, and there he was, pale, almost see-through, as if grief had worn his spirit thin. He didn't look at me. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was empty. "I need our book, Roach and Crown. It's in the hiding place in my shop." "And what? You want to brew more poison?" he asked bitterly. "No, I want to brew a truth potion." That made him look up. He slowly turned his face toward me. "Truth?" he echoed with a hollow laugh. "Haven't I heard enough of that already?" "Not your truth," I snapped. "Theirs. We're going back to the palace, to the memorial dinner, and we're going to force the killer into the open. Or do you not want that anymore?" A spark lit in his eyes, not the old fury, but something steadier. Resolve. "I do," he said quietly. "But how do we get the book? Your shop is probably being watched." "The same way we escaped the prison. You'll possess a guard, walk in, and grab it. The hiding spot is under the floor plank in the back room." Edwin gritted his ghosty teeth, performed his signature maneuver. It was unsettling to watch the guard's face twist in confusion as Edwin slipped inside him. The man staggered, stumbled through the door, cracked the seal, disappeared for a minute, and came back out holding a wrapped bundle. He shoved it into my hands. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed unconscious on the ground. We had the book. The next 2 days I spent deep in the forest, hunting the rarest, most temperamental ingredients. Moonstone bloom, which only opens at dawn on a full moon. Fresh whisper root, dug up alive with a bead of dew still clinging to the tip. Edwin grew more anxious by the hour, hovering and fluttering like a very nervous, very transparent hawk. "How much longer?" he kept asking. "People are already gathering. The memorial dinner is tonight." "If you bother me again instead of a truth potion, I'm going to end up with the stew of your nervousness," I barked, yanking the pot away from him as he drifted straight through it for the 20th time. "Go do something useful. Count clouds." Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the liquid in the cauldron turned the color of the purest sky and stopped bubbling. I carefully poured it into a small crystal vial I'd found in the same hiding place as the book. "Done," I said, my hands shaking from exhaustion and tension. Edwin froze in front of me, his expression solemn. "You realize what awaits us in there. If this doesn't work—" "It will," I cut him off, with more confidence than I actually felt. "But we don't have another choice. Come on, it's time to end this." We both stared towards the distant palace where the first lights were flickering to life. Tonight's memorial dinner would be someone's last, either theirs or ours.
Chapter 12, where Ginny exposes the killer.
40 days, 40 long days and moonless nights since the poison-eyed brood had stopped the prince's heart. For the living, 40 days is when a soul finally leaves the earth. For Edwin, it was the last fleeting moment, the final chance to hear the truth before whatever force kept him here dissolved forever. He was barely visible now. The walls of the abandoned ranger's hut showed through his translucent form. He looked like a drawing on water, a single ripple away from vanishing. Ginny. His voice was as soft as dried leaves brushing over stone. I feel nothing, only cold. Hold on. I clutched the crystal vial of truth potion. It suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Root and crown rested against my chest like a slab of ice. You have to hear this. You deserve to hear it. What if I don't want the truth? His whisper was bottomless with exhaustion. What if that truth kills me all over again? It already killed you, I said sharply, forcing myself to stay focused instead of pitying him. But now we're going to kill your murderers with their own words, their reputations, their schemes. I stood, my resolve hardening. Let's go. We slipped into the palace like shadows. The air in the small throne hall where the memorial dinner was laid out was thick and stagnant, like the inside of a crypt. It smelled of melted wax, expensive wine, and counterfeit grief. 3 people sat at the table. The Queen Mother, her beauty twisted into a mask of shattered sorrow. Lord Caelan, his hand resting on hers, an attempt at comfort that now felt like a blade of betrayal. And Princess Annalise, cold and glorious, a statue carved from ice, with Captain Ryan standing behind her chair like a devoted shadow. Hidden behind a heavy tapestry, my heart pounded so hard I feared the whole hall could hear it. I watched a servant pour dark wine into Annalise's golden goblet. This was my moment, my only chance. I darted forward, splashed the potion into the cup, and slipped back into the shadows. Get ready, I whispered to Edwin. It's happening. He gathered the last shreds of his strength, and for a heartbeat his ghostly form sharpened. He stared at his sister, not with hatred, but with a tortured hunger to understand. Annalise lifted her goblet for a toast. She took a small sip, and then froze. Her fingers squeezed the cup so tightly the gold almost bent. "How touching," she said. Her voice, normally soft and melodious, cut through the solemn hush like a poisoned blade. We gathered here to mourn. Who exactly? A pretender? A bastard who dared take a place that was never his? The Queen gasped as if struck across the face. "Annalise, by all the saints, how can you say such things now?" "I'm speaking the truth, Mother." Annalise shot to her feet, eyes wild with feverish, vicious light. She pointed a trembling finger at Caelan. "The truth about him and about you. I read your diaries, every pitiful, slobbering confession of love for your dear brother-in-law. Edwin was the fruit of your sin, your adultery, a stain on our bloodline." Lord Caelan rose slowly. He was pale, but his voice was steady and strong. "Your spite blinds you, child. He was your brother. He was my son, and I loved him more than my own life." "Brother?" Annalise laughed, a horrible sound. "A bastard cannot be my brother. He was an obstacle in my way to the throne, a blot I erased." The confession hung in the room like a thick,
choking fog. The queen staggered back as if struck across the face. "You?" she breathed. "It was you." "I did what our family should have done years ago. I cleansed our dynasty. And when I turn 18, I will take what is rightfully mine. And you," her gaze swept across her mother and Kaelin, "you two traitors and sinners will be executed as enemies of the state." "Never." Kaelin stepped forward, his voice steady as steel. "In you, I see my brother. His cruelty, his hunger for power. I won't let you destroy everything Edwin loved. I won't let you become queen." Annalise's eyes narrowed to razor-thin slits. "Ryan!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Get ready," I whispered to Edwin. "It's happening." He gathered the last shreds of his strength, and for a heartbeat his ghostly form sharpened. He stared at his sister, not with hatred, but with a tortured hunger to understand. Princess Annalise lifted her goblet for a toast. She took a small sip, and then froze. Captain Ryan, silent until now, lunged forward. A dagger flashed from under his cloak. Kaelin seized a heavy silver candlestick. No chivalry here, no honor, just a desperate fight to survive. Metal clashed, breaths grew ragged. It was savage, ugly, and then the worst moment. The queen, seeing Ryan raise his dagger for the killing blow, threw herself between them with a scream. Blinded by rage, he couldn't stop in time. The blade slid into her side with horrific ease. Time stopped. Annalise froze, her triumphant expression collapsing into shock. Kaelin shoved Ryan away and caught the queen as she fell. "Lilia, no! No!" She was already gone. Her final gaze wasn't for her killer. It was for the man she loved her entire life. "Guards!" I burst from behind the tapestry, tears streaming down my face. "Treason! Murder!" Guards stormed in. Seeing the queen's body in Kaelin's arms, they seized Captain Ryan without hesitation. Annalise stood motionless, staring at her mother with hollow eyes. And then I saw him, Edwin. He knelt beside the bodies of his parents, the woman who bore him, and the man who was truly his father. His form flickered like the last ember of a dying fire.
He was almost gone. No! I dropped to my knees. I reached for him, my hands passing through cold mist. "No, Edwin, please. Look, we did it. The truth is out. They'll pay. Don't leave me alone." He raised his eyes to mine. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only endless, aching sorrow and forgiveness. "Ginny." His voice was faint as a sigh. "My clumsy savior. Forgive me for being such a burden." "You weren't a burden," I sobbed, trying to gather him into my arms. "You were the most unbearable, arrogant, impossible ghost I've ever met. And I don't want you to go. It's done." Each word cost him. "Thank you for everything. For letting me finish what I started." His image trembled, blurring, dissolving, watercolor in the rain. He lifted a hand, trying to touch my cheek, and for the briefest heartbeat, I felt a feather of cold wind brush my skin. "Don't go," I whispered, though deep down, I knew there was no stopping it. He smiled, a soft, sorrowful smile. And then he scattered. No sound, no flash, just a quiet sigh, like a snowflake melting on a warm palm. Thousands of shimmering motes hung in the air for one last heartbeat, then vanished. He was gone. I remained kneeling on the cold stone floor, surrounded by the wreckage of other people's sins, sobbing silently. The truth had prevailed. The killer unmasked. Justice delivered. But in the hollow hall, broken by nothing but my own muffled weeping, victory tasted only of an all-consuming, crushing sorrow.
Epilogue.
The sun above Alandria's main square was mercilessly bright. It danced cheerfully along the blade of the executioner's axe, blinding the crowd that had gathered to witness the finale of a bloody drama. Captain Ryan, stripped of a rank and honors, stood on the scaffold with an empty stare. When the heavy blade came down, a cry burst from 1,000 throats at once. Disgusted, shocked, grateful. Justice had been served. But for me, watching from behind a column at the edge of the square, there was not a drop of comfort in that justice. It was just a death. One more death in a long, unbroken chain. Princess Annalise was not executed. Her fate was perhaps worse. She was sent to the Monastery of Holy Silence, perched on the northernmost cliffs where the wind howled year-round, and from the narrow cell windows one could see nothing but the gray, restless ocean. She was to spend the rest of her days in prayer and silence, with nothing but her own madness and regrets for company. They said that when they took her away in the barred carriage, she did not shed a single tear. She only stared out the window with an icy, hollow gaze, as if her soul had gone on ahead, following her brother and mother. The throne of Alandria, washed in tears and blood, passed to Lord Callan. The crown on his head might as well have been made of lead, not gold. When he swore his oath before the council, there was no trace of joy or triumph in his face, only endless weariness and a quiet, devouring grief. He had lost everything. A brother he had respected, despite everything. A woman he had secretly loved his entire life. And a son he had never been allowed to call his own. Now his only purpose, his only redemption, was to change the fate of the kingdom, to give it the peace and prosperity Edwin had dreamed of. He became the philosopher king, the grieving king. And as people whispered at court, he might well be the greatest ruler Alandria had ever known. As for my story in the capital, that was over. I found my father's creditors in that same tavern, the Rusty Gnome, and threw their repayment purse right in their faces. The stunned, greedy looks they gave me are something I'll cherish with wicked satisfaction for the rest of my life. I sold the shop, Peters and Daughter, for next to nothing to some sharp-eyed merchant, barely bargaining at all. I no longer needed those walls steeped in the smell of poverty and despair, nor the dusty bottles, nor the heavy legacy of root and crown. The book I stuffed at the very bottom of my travel bag. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I wasn't ready to even think about using it again. The wagon carrying me back to my father in Alderhook jolted and rattled over every rut in the road, and each bump echoed inside me as a fresh pang of hollow silence. I sat wrapped in a simple woolen shawl that did nothing to protect me from the only cold that mattered, the one coming from within. I watched as the familiar, hated, painfully beloved silhouette slipped away behind us. Those towers where I had been a criminal and a savior, a prisoner and a detective. What lived in my chest now wasn't just a strange emptiness. It was a gaping wound where all feelings, all colors, all noise of life had drained away. I was free. The debt was paid, the killer punished. The shadow of guilt had not vanished, but it had retreated, settling into a dull background ache I would likely live with for the rest of my days. But along with it, I had lost the only being that had ever made me feel truly alive in this whole nightmare. Edwin. Arrogant, moody, insufferable Edwin. His voice, always hovering somewhere between sarcasm, hysteria, and raw pain, had become the soundtrack to my fall and to my strange, twisted resurrection. His ghostly presence, which at first felt like a curse, had become a necessity. He was my accomplice, my conscience, my counterweight. He was the one who didn't just see a poor cornered herbalist in me, but someone you could argue with, rely on, boss around. And now, in my head, there was only crushing, deafening silence. No one grumbled that I smelt like onions anymore. No one offered absurd advice at the worst possible moment. No one demanded the impossible from me, forcing me to grow. I was alone again, alone with my freedom, which tasted like ash, alone with my victory, which reeked of blood and tears. I had won the war and lost the only thing that had given it meaning in the darkest hours. Edwin. Arrogant, moody, insufferable Edwin. His voice, always hovering somewhere between sarcasm, hysteria, and raw pain, had become the soundtrack to my fall and to my strange, twisted resurrection. His ghostly presence, which at first felt like a curse, had become a necessity. He was my accomplice, my conscience, my counterweight. He was the one who didn't just see a poor cornered herbalist in me, but someone you could argue with, rely on, boss around. And now, in my head, there was only crushing, deafening silence. No one grumbled that I smelt like onions anymore. No one offered absurd advice at the worst possible moment. No one demanded the impossible from me, forcing me to grow. I was alone again, alone with my freedom, which tasted like ash, alone with my victory, which reeked of blood and tears. I had won the war and lost the only thing that had given it meaning in the darkest hours.
I pressed my forehead to the cool wood of the wagon wall and closed my eyes, letting the tears flow silently, soaking into the rough wool of my shawl. I cried for him, for his ridiculous, clumsy attempt to possess a guard, for his horror when he saw his sister, for that frozen, shattered look in his eyes when he learned the truth about his birth, and for his last, barely audible, thank you, which had sounded so much like goodbye. Now I was supposed to ride toward the quiet, peaceful life I had once dreamed of. But the thought of it didn't comfort me. It scared me, because I could no longer imagine my future without that constant, annoying, irreplaceable chill at my back, without that soft voice in my head urging me forward straight into the heart of madness. And then I felt it. At first, just a strange chill at my back, like a draft, but the day was still and windless. I frowned. The chill grew stronger, turning into an icy breath that brushed across my neck. I flinched and turned around. On the empty bench opposite me, a familiar, shimmering mist was curling and thickening. My heart plummeted into my boots, then leapt back up and began pounding like mad. I forgot how to breathe. I couldn't form a single word. The mist condensed, took shape, and a heartbeat later, Prince Edwin was sitting across from me with his usual unbothered air. He looked more solid than he had in that final instant, more put together, and on his face played that same painfully familiar, arrogant smirk. "Well," he said, his voice clear and steady now, no hint of that breathless weakness, "I suppose you missed me?" I stared at him, mouth hanging open. All 5 stages of grief flashed through my head: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I got stuck on anger. My throat was suddenly dry. I cleared it and tried again. You vanished. I cried over you. I mourned you. I nearly went gray from grief. And you just come back? Just like that? How?" Edwin flicked his hand dismissively. A few of his fingers momentarily detached, then snapped back into place. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. On the other side, everything turned out to be unbearably bureaucratic. My case file, as they call it, was sent back for revision. Turns out I hadn't finished my earthly business." "What business?" I croaked. "The killer is dead, your sister's in a monastery, your father is on the throne. What business?" "Well, actually," he said, drawing himself up importantly, "I was very clearly instructed to find a powerful witch, someone who can help me, restore my material form, return to the land of the living, properly." I stared at him, trying to process that. "A witch?" I repeated slowly. "And where do you intend to find one? It's not as if they take out ads in weekly papers." Edwin paused for dramatic effect, then elegantly pointed a translucent finger at me. "I'd say she's a lot closer than we think." The wagon jolted over another pothole in the road. I sat there, still speechless, staring at the smug face of the ghost who had just barged back into my life. First, everything inside me boiled. Then it settled. And then I laughed. It was shaky, slightly hysterical, but honest laughter. "So, in other words," I said, "you got kicked out of the afterlife. I assume they got sick of you there even faster than I did here. They threw you out, and now you're my problem again." "I'd put it as, I'm your chance to prove yourself," he countered, "and perhaps our ticket to a set of adventures that are slightly less tragic." "Alderhook, you said. I do hope they have a decent library. We have research to begin." I shook my head, glancing first at Alandria shrinking on the horizon, then at the ghostly prince who had made himself comfortable in my wagon as if he owned it. Peaceful, quiet life with my father was slipping away from me again. But, by all the gods, it definitely wouldn't be boring. "All right, Your Highness," I sighed, with exaggerated resignation, with a strange, unfamiliar note of relief hidden beneath it. "Let's go, toward adventure, and hopefully as far away from donkeys as possible." The wagon rattled onward, leaving the past behind and carrying into the future a most peculiar pair. A former herbalist with a dark inheritance, and her temperamental, unkillable ghost prince. Their story was far from over. It was only just beginning.